I'm Paula Gale. This is the broadcast. Should Canada sanction China for human rights violations in the fishing industry? Over the past while, we've been sharing some of the work of journalist Ian Urbina and the Outlaw Ocean Project. Outlaw Ocean is a U.S.-based nonprofit that investigates fisheries crimes and human rights violations on the high seas. China has been at the center of a lot of these investigations. We've heard about some of the environmental and human rights abuses happening around its distant water fleet. Our next guest says Canada could play a bigger role in stopping this. Austin Brush is the research and investigations editor for the Outlaw Ocean Project. He says China's distant water fleet can include as many as 6,000 vessels.
And they fish really all over the world. The fleet catches more than 5 billion pounds of seafood a year. And the Chinese seafood industry, by some estimates, accounts for about a fifth of the entire international trade of seafood products.
Right. So it's not just squid that they're fishing with the distant water fleet.
No, it's much broader than squid. It also includes tuna and species like that. The focus of our investigation, though, at least in looking at the distant water fishing fleet, was largely focused on the squid fishing fleet.
Okay, yes. Ian Urbina told us about how some of the crew are treated, aboard ships in this fleet. Some people are kept like prisoners for years at a time at sea. Like, what were some of the worst abuses that the Outlaw Ocean uncovered?
When we were looking into this, we found, many cases of pretty dire and sometimes deadly working conditions on some of these vessels. On these ships, workers sometimes have to spend 2 years at a time at sea with no internet or phone signal, which kind of contributes to this pretty intense isolation. Sometimes their work days would be 15 hours. They work 6 days a week. And as a result, we found lots of evidence of injuries, malnutrition, illness, and other factors. On these ships, we also identified cases in which crew members were beaten by, the captain or senior management on the ships, maybe for not working to the degree to which they wanted, or for asking maybe to be returned home or complaining about conditions. So we found that these workers were quite vulnerable, in some cases beaten quite severely or tormented in others.
Yeah, and I know that some people even died because they were denied medical treatment, right?
So one of the incentives for these ships is to stay out at sea for longer, because to return to port is quite costly, and it impedes with their ability to fish. So as a result, we did identify cases in which crew members were denied, the proper medical care to take corrective action, for their illnesses, and as a result, passed away at sea. One other big area we saw was via the disease kind of route was beriberi, which is a disease caused by deficiency of vitamin B1 or thiamine. And we begin to note that beriberi is quite prevalent on Chinese vessels, in part because they stay at sea so long. And the interesting thing about beriberi, is that it's quite avoidable and easily reversed. So after speaking with experts, they noted to us that it's likely an indication of conditions of captivity on these ships and not properly being fed, so malnutrition and other instances, given the fact that it is quite reversible in reality.
Yeah, and I also know that, some of these ships kind of go dark. You can't really find them or whatever using radar or technology, and that because they're on the high seas, they're kind of outside of the laws of countries.
Yeah, the high seas, the way it works is that each ship is under the jurisdiction of its flag state, and that means there's limitations to what other countries can do to impede. Additionally, the crew members are subject to the labor laws of the country of the vessel that they're on. And even so, in many of these vessels, they're a couple of days voyage, if at minimum, from the nearest country or port. So they're quite isolated out there on the high seas.
So Austin, I know there's been a submission to Global Affairs Canada. Who is the submission from?
So the submission was from two human rights groups based in Canada, the Human Rights Action Group and the Uyghur Rights Advocacy Project.
All right. And what is this submission asking Global Affairs to do?
So the submission is asking the Canadian government to impose sanctions on 8 Chinese companies and their executive management or beneficial owners, the ones who hold a significant share in each of these companies. And largely these requests for sanctions are over alleged rights violations, including forced labor and abuse of deckhands committed on these Chinese distant water fishing fleets.
And I just want to talk about, in this submission, like you're like naming these companies and the people behind them, making these names public. Why is that important?
I think it's important, one, because these are some of the most serious perpetrators of these issues at sea. So it's important from a kind of transparency standpoint, but also, ultimately via these sanctions and also raising awareness about these specific companies, there should be movement towards companies in Canada, United States, and other Western markets to make sure that when they're not buying from companies that are actively exploiting and contributing to forced labor conditions for crew members at sea.
Okay, you just mentioned sanctions. So that's the ask here. Like, what could sanctions look like? Just kind of explain that.
Gotcha. So, yeah, sanctions in the case of these companies could largely look like banning the import of seafood products from these companies or from companies that might buy from these vessel operators. And that would basically prohibit the importation of squid products or any seafood product that might be caught at sea via forced labor from entering Canadian markets and ending up on, the tables of everyday Canadians.
Yeah. So if Canada were to pursue these sanctions, like what's the hopeful effect here?
The hopeful effect would be that, one, these particular companies would be blocked from exporting to Canada, as well as raising awareness for major seafood companies in Canada to conduct better due diligence on their own supply chains. To make sure, one, they're not buying from these companies, but also that they have a heightened risk awareness of seafood coming from China and any Chinese company writ large, given the kind of systemic abuse of deckhands on these fishing vessels.
Okay, I know this was only submitted on September the 3rd, but has there been a response yet from Global Affairs Canada?
As of yet, there's not been a response to us. We have heard via the two human rights groups that they're reviewing the submissions, but as of yet, no decisions have been made on it.
So what concerns do you have, and does the Outlaw Ocean, have if Canada doesn't take action?
Ultimately, there has to be a mechanism by which these companies can't export to the United States or to Canada, more specifically, given their track record of human rights abuses. So while sanctions might not be the only solution, there are additional import controls that can be used to block imports or exports from these companies into Canada.
Yeah, and I guess just for the regular person at home and they're going grocery shopping, you may not know the names of these companies or who's involved with them, but is there anything that we as consumers can look for when we're purchasing seafood, or what seafood should we avoid?
Yeah, as a consumer, you can certainly look for country of origin on product packaging and use that to guide how you purchase. Given the findings of this investigation, and specifically for squid, I would be, you can look at country of origin for those products, and if it's from China, you should approach it with maybe a higher level of scrutiny. There are a number of resources out there too, where you can see both the sustainability, but also the, human rights metrics associated with specific fisheries. And I would recommend that any consumer maybe check those before going to the supermarket and use that to guide their purchasing strategies.
Okay, Austin, is there anything else you'd like to talk about while I have you here on this subject?
I guess for the importance of this, and for anybody who's wondering, to what degree does Canada might buy seafood from China? Based off of numbers we have from 2021, China imported over $500 million of seafood products from China, and China was its second largest supplier after the United States. So even if it might seem like a distant issue, this is something that every average Canadian is interacting with if they're purchasing seafood. So it's something that is important for the average listener or average consumer to be aware of. In particular, seafood from China, given its kind of status as one of the largest distant water fishing fleets, as well as exporters of seafood around the world.
Okay, Austin, thank you so much. Thank you for talking to us today.
Yeah, thank you, Paula.
That was Austin Brush, the Research and Investigations Editor for the Outlaw Ocean Project. I'm Paula Gale. I'll see you soon.
For more CBC podcasts, go to cbc.ca/podcasts.